Training the dogs is one thing, but training the people, that's really where it is, because now they can be better to their dogs. Their dogs can trust them more, and they're going to be more successful. And I've done a lot of coaching of people at nationals, and it's really what turns me on, is putting together the dog-handler combination and helping them understand each other. And well, success is bound to happen when you can do that.
Hey there. Good evening. Welcome. I'll tell you, I'm super excited about tonight. We're going to have a great show, a great evening. And I want to thank you all for being here. And I want to tell you, this whole thing wouldn't be possible if it wasn't for Purina. And I thank everybody at Purina. I just had a great tour of their place, and what an amazing facility and everything they do for our sporting dogs. It's incredible. Carl Gunzer and Ray Vogt are really doing a great job over there, and we really appreciate everything that they do. Let me tell you a little bit about this evening's agenda before I tell you about Connie. We're going to do this in a 3-part segments, 3 series. And the first series, the first part, and we're going to break it up pretty evenly. Our foundation skills are universal, is what that's titled. And you'll hear a little bit more about that. Part 2 is going to talk about competitive obedience, the challenges and how we overcome them. Part 3, and this is going to be interesting, I'll tell you, dealing with aggression and other difficult behaviors. So I can't wait. I've had a few conversations with Connie about this stuff, and I said, hold it, just wait. Save that for tonight. So, because I'm just as excited as you all are. Let me tell you a little bit about our guest this evening. Connie Cleveland-Nolan, part of a great and one of the most incredible dog mind teams between Connie and her husband, Pat. Connie ran Dog Trainers Workshop in Fountain Inn, South Carolina for a bit over 30 years. She coached hundreds of people over that course of that time. And, well, did an incredible thing. She's moved on since then. Connie competes in competition obedience. She's made 12 obedience trial champions. She also competes in retriever field trials. She's made 5 amateur field champions in field trials and 2 field champions. So I bet you there's not many people that have those credentials. So that's incredible stuff. Connie continues to coach today through her Obedience Road website, membership format, and a lot of her courses. And Obedience Road was established in 2020. So incredible stuff. And after that being said, I'd like to welcome Connie. Connie, if you're there, go ahead and pop in for us. There you are.
Good evening. Good evening. That was very kind of you.
Well, it's even understated, Connie.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks for having me. And thanks to Purina for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, you and a bunch of other people. I can't wait to get started. So we're going to talk about our part 1 of the agenda is the foundation skills are universal. And you wrote it as, and let me read it so I get it right. Performance dogs, no matter what the venue, all require certain skills that will make them more successful. How about you expand on that a little bit for me? Where are we going with this?
Well, when we talked about this agenda, my original response to that was there are certain commands that I think are foundation skill. They're commands that dogs need to know. And we could say they have to come when they're called, they have to stay where they're put, they have to walk on a leash. And we were kind of thinking in terms of commands. And then if you take that a step further, though, when we're talking about dogs that want to be successful in advanced training, and so many people now are competing in more than one venue, let's not talk about the commands they have to learn, but about the skills they need to have. And if I were to say to you, I'm going to pick up a dog tomorrow and it's had no training and I'm going to start training it, what things would be important for me to start with. And I think that the first thing I would say is you did a talk with my husband earlier in the year, I think, and he was talking about puppies and this idea of executive function. And people can listen to that and listen to what it makes up executive function. But this is very similar. We have to have a dog who, first of all, wants to interact with us, especially when we talk about training a dog at an advanced level. And so very simply, the first thing I'm going to try to do is establish rewards with dogs. I want this dog to know, hey, she's got stuff I want and I can make her give it to me. And so I talk about rewards on the obedience road and to my obedience competitors as two forms of positive motivation. I need to be able to say to a dog, hey, you're doing the right thing, keep doing it. We call that a carry-on marker, right? So if I say to a dog, good, I want him to understand. I should keep doing what I'm doing. We also want a dog who understands a reward marker. And we can go into more detail about what that is. However, I would say to most people, it is the positive reinforcement that allows us to teach dogs to move away from us to get what they want. Most of us, if you put a reward in your hand, you're expert lurers. We can get a dog to chase a cookie. And we can even get a dog to understand, hey, she's got the cookie. And if I follow where she puts the cookie and do what she wants, I can get her to give it to me. But can we hold up the reward, whether it's a piece of food or a bumper, and say, go do that, and then I will give you this? Because that's a higher level ability to communicate with an animal. And we're talking about getting ready for advanced skills. I would also, if I had that dog and I got him tomorrow, I'd start teaching him to come right away. Because if I put a long line on him and I start to teach him to come, what I'm really teaching him to do is to pay attention to me. Hey, if I say come, it means you got to stop what you're doing and come to me. So when we talk about skills, well, the fourth thing I would do with him is I'd get him to retrieve. And I don't care what breed of dog it is. I raised a border terrier a couple of years ago. It was really important to me that I got him retrieving. So many dogs are motivated by retrieving even more than they are food, that I can use his interest in retrieving and my ability to provide a retrieve for him as a way to reward him. So I want, whether you're here because you do agility or herding or fly ball or dock diving or obedience, or, I can name lots and lots of venues. I think that's what we have to think of, is our ability to communicate with him, both to convince him, you've got what I want, and if I do what you want, I will get it. And also, hey, I can avoid something unpleasant if I do what you want. In its simplest form, stop what you're doing and come to me when I call you.
So, what were you telling me a little bit about a field trial dog that really didn't have? Is that was an interesting story? That didn't have kind of social skills. Was very well trained in the field, but overall didn't function very well in the house, for example.
I think what happens to us, and I have several, I could go on with examples like this. I think what happens to us, when most of us got our first dog, we needed him to be better trained. And a lot of us showed up in an obedience class because we just wanted him to stay where he was put, come when he was called, walk on a loose leash, and stop jumping on people, right? Mm-hmm. And then we got interested in dog training. And some of us got interested in the sport of obedience, but some of us went on to do other things. And then you start raising other puppies and you start to become very myopic about what that puppy needs to do. So I was sharing a story with you of a dog that somebody wanted to sell to a friend of mine. It was an 18-month-old retriever. He'd done lots of retrieving, and she took him home. She was going to check it out. She couldn't get him in the house. He wouldn't go up and down stairs. And you look at that and you think, whoa, wait a minute, we missed the forest for the trees, right? We wanted him to be a great retriever, but he has to function. I had a gal come to a seminar. She has a dog that is a very, very high scoring dog in obedience. And when they come to my seminars, they can present problems to me. Her problem was literally, I cannot get the dog from the crate to the ring because he drags me across the building. And I thought, okay, we got this dog who's an unbelievable competitor, but he doesn't have good manners enough to get across the building. So, I think we can't lose sight of the fact that we do want a dog who is attentive to us, interested in what we want, environmentally sound. All those things are important. We can't get so involved in our sport that we forget about the periphery.
You know, I can certainly see maybe a field trial dog that goes to a young dog trainer and doesn't get a lot of the social interaction in the house and all those kinds of things, and you know, being the way you just described. Uh, and and it's certainly got to hinder them down the road, even if their field skills are great.
I believe that the better that your dog is communicating with you, the better you're going to do all the way around. You know, I mean, I think that people have often asked me, why do you do obedience and run field trials? Those sports are so different. And my response is, the motivation is so different. When I go out to run a field trial dog, he's totally in drive, wants to retrieve. In a large part, those dogs can look at us like we're in their way. Get out of the way because I got birds to retrieve, and you're just the receptacle and you drive the truck. And the more communication you have with that dog, the better he is when you're asking him to be obedient out in the field. Likewise, I take those dogs into the obedience arena and I'm trying to get them interested in doing something that they really have no natural desire to do. If any of the obedience dogs in the world knew how important it was to sit straight, they would not sign up for that sport. So, in that sport, I'm teaching dogs to do things that are not at all natural, and I have to teach them to enjoy it. And then when I walk into the field, I'm trying to take a dog who really would rather that I just got out of the way and say, look, I am important to this communication. You and I are going to find birds together. This is a scavenger hunt, but I got the clues.
So, I guess when we think of the world of retrieving and field dogs, you're right. The reward so often is the retrieve itself, and that's really what And I just came from a group of very competitive Springer Spaniel trainers that last year's national champion came from, and they use the retrieve, even though they don't do a ton of retrieving. They do retrieve the birds they shoot, but their primary goal is flushing.
Right.
But so many of the reward deals they do are they get to go and retrieve a bumper. They do a task that I thought was so interesting. That's very much appropriate to what you said. Is they teach them some camps teach them to quarter through a series of buckets to do a figure 8 pattern, and then they do it when they're set, and then the bumper is at the end of the course. So, but they have to do all this, and then they get to retrieve, and it's very much like what you just described.
Yeah, breaking this all down into, really bite-sized pieces for the people that are watching. I don't care what breed of puppy you handed me tomorrow, whether it was going to be my hoping to be my next obedience champion or field champion, or I was going to do agility with it. I know I would start in the same place. I would start with, I have what you want, and you can get me to give it to you, both by luring. Now, luring is something you do for short periods of time. You could lure the puppy to sit, or you can lure the puppy into heel position, but also by teaching him, hey, I've got what you want, but if you go over there, I'll give it to you. Most puppies are motivated by food before they're motivated by the retrieve. Interestingly, I've had retriever people say to me, oh, I don't want to use food. Maybe he'll always like it better than a retrieve. That doesn't happen. That's an unfounded fear. And no matter what puppy it was, so I'd be luring him, I'd be teaching him to move away from reward to earn reward. I'd be teaching him to come, and I'd be encouraging the retrieve. And I know that I would be doing those things no matter what breed it was, no matter what I intended to do with him for the long haul.
So let me see if I understand this. I guess, as I'm thinking through what you've just described, you're really starting that whole pattern of learning and behavior to perform a task to get a reward of some description. And the task becomes slightly more and more complex as they get older until it becomes quite complex. But once that whole pattern of behavior and you've really got it on a roll, it really feeds upon itself until throughout the course of their whole life, for that matter.
Yes, it absolutely does. But people often say to me, I really want to have fun training this dog, and I want the dog to have fun. And I am totally on board with that. I
Yeah.
feel exactly the same way. I want to wake up in the morning and think, I can't wait to get up because I'm going to be training, whoever it is. What makes a dog have fun? I think what makes it have fun is that the dog says, I'm in control.
Okay.
I can make you give me things I want, and I can keep you from doing things I don't want. And so that starts at the very beginning. I can keep you from tugging on that rope when I come when you call me. I can keep you from tugging on that leash by walking on a loose leash. I can make you throw that bumper for me by staying right here until you tell me to go. And once they start to believe I'm in control, there's no, gee, I hope she decides to reward me pretty soon because I've been waiting a long time. Or, man, I hope she doesn't lose her temper and hurt me again because that's no fun. That's not the situation you want a dog in. You want them to say, I make good things happen, I keep bad things from happening, and they're totally involved and engaged in training no matter what it is you're trying to teach them to do.
So if I said to you, some dogs seem to have a greater willingness to please, do you think they just drew the conclusion quicker than other dogs, or some dogs are just more prone to appreciating affection, or something of that description?
I think that that's a really hard question to answer because we're looking at all kinds of trainers and their expectation. But if I got that new dog tomorrow, the first thing that I would be working on is what makes him tick, what makes him excited.
Okay.
If me saying good dog and petting him, that's great. But I'm not going to stop there, and I'm not going to think, well, he's not willing to please because he's not happy that I'm happy. I'm going to find something he wants. And the sooner we find what he wants, the more cooperative he becomes.
That's really a good point. Yeah, because there's always something. It's just a matter of figuring out the puzzle. So that may lead us into our next section. How are we doing here? Yeah, just about right. Competitive obedience. And let me read it so I've got it just right. The challenges and how we overcome them. Competition obedience is unique in that it requires dogs to be both animated and accurate. Connie, you said you're going to discuss the strategies for getting our dogs to love performing in this challenging venue.
And it is a challenge. Obedience is the dressage of dog sports. Mm-hmm. And we're asking dogs to move in ways and perform in ways that require incredible accuracy. And dogs are really not they're not naturally motivated at all to be that accurate. So how do I get them to love to do it? I think that understanding the purpose and the use of a reward marker is huge. And I think that a lot of venues, the dog is so motivated to do the activity that they don't really pay attention to the importance of a reward marker. I would never, again, train a dog that didn't have a reward marker. And let me explain to you what I mean by that. Mm-hmm. We've all heard of Pavlov. Pavlov rang the bell and fed the dog, rang the bell and fed the dog. It was a conditioned reinforcer, a conditioned secondary reinforcer actually is what it's officially called, but we on the street call it a reward marker. It meant I hear the bell, I'm going to get food. I hear the bell, I'm going to get food. Pretty soon, the dog was just as excited when he heard the bell as when he was offered the food. What that means is that the dopamine release and the excitement that's generated by the reward was now generated by the noise. Now, I'm just going to tell you a story because I think that this will make the best sense. Years ago, I was teaching a group of advanced beginners, they'd had 8 weeks of obedience, mm-hmm. how to get their dogs to go to a bed. These are pet owners. The dog's got a bed in the corner of the room. They want to be able to say, go to your bed, and have the dog run across the room and get on his bed. And I'm teaching them to do this with a reward marker. And I'm mm-hmm. saying, you're going to guide the dog up onto the bed, and when his 4th foot hits the bed, you're going to use a verbal reward marker. You can use a clicker if you want, but most people, if they can use a verbal reward marker, it's one less piece of equipment. So they send the dog to the bed. They say they were using the word yes. They say yes, they give the dog a treat. Send the dog to bed, yes, give him a treat. Well, if you've ever taught obedience classes, you got some naysayer, curmudgeon-y lady in the room who says this isn't going to work. So this woman says to me, my dog hates the bed. And I got 8 people in the room or 10 people in the room. So I said to her, just humor me. I said, just you keep working on it. I'm going to check with the other people. I'll be back. Well, I'm walking around the room, and about 5 minutes later, she yells across the room to me, Connie, he likes it. So this little dog, who was resistant even to getting on this little platform bed, is now jumping on the bed. Now, that's what a reward marker does. A reward marker connects the behavior with the reward. And at first, it's the reward that gets him excited. Then it's the marker that gets him excited. And then any behavior that you connect to reward with a reward marker, the behavior becomes fun to do. Okay? It's that chain. So now the dopamine release is happening when he jumps on the bed. And it's true. All of a sudden, this dog likes a seemingly stupid task. Go to your bed. Okay? And when we realize that we can teach dogs to enjoy things that are otherwise not particularly naturally enjoyable by using a reward marker, it just changes so much about the obedience we ask to do. It's no longer drudgery to heel and sit and, come and sit and go back to heel position. It's not drudgery if I connect it to reward. And if the reward is connected to a reward marker. It's just a fascinating, you can read the science if you've not ever read the book, The Compass of Pleasure. It's a hard read, but it describes the science of it. It's fascinating. And so that's how we make dogs love obedience. Do you want me to go on, or you want to ask me?
No.
You want to ask me a question?
No, I want you to go on.
Okay.
I guess one question came to mind. So obviously now you're, as you go from 8 weeks to 3 years and 8 weeks, the tasks are becoming multiple and more complex. They're doing multiple things associated with reward markers. But as you get into more complex tasks, and there is the deal of, well, here's the example, because I know I talked to Pat about some scent detection dogs, and we talked about the timing of the marker, the communication, and how critical the timing was, because some of the behavior was pretty subtle. And now, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but Pat described how if a dog went in and identified an odor, and it was the proper odor, that's when the reward marker happened. But he said if you were a little bit slow in the marking of the behavior, and the dog was starting to leave the odor, that you were actually rewarding the behavior of leaving the odor, not going to it. How critical is the timing, in your opinion, on some of these more complex tasks?
Well, can I use another example?
Absolutely.
Another one. When I started training dogs, and that was a long time ago, when we realized that we wanted dogs to have a better attitude, let's say you had a bumper in your pocket, you'd do a little bit of obedience, and when you were done working, you'd play with the dog. Okay? And it worked pretty well. I mean, it was better than not doing it. So then we would play with the dog, and then work him a little bit, and then play with the dog. Okay? And then you might have even said, I'm going to play a little bit, I'm going to work a little bit, play a little bit, work a little bit. So we're talking about timing. But when we were doing that, the dog's behavior had nothing to do with when you decided to stop and play.
Okay.
So the dog is doing his obedience, and he's dutifully doing it, and you finally reach in your pocket to get the bumper. And he goes, oh, thank goodness, Pat reached for the bumper. That's wonderful. So in other words, he didn't connect his behavior with getting the reward. He was watching for you to reach in your pocket, and probably didn't think he had any control over when you reached in your pocket. Okay? But now I say to people all the time, I never give my dog a reward unless it's in response to what he did. I don't want him waiting for me to do it. I don't want him looking for me to reach in his pocket. So let's say I'm healing and I want to, like you said, timing of the reward marker.
Okay.
I want him to know that his behavior made the reward happen. Well, what I want to do is I want to heal along. I'm not, the bumpers might be in my pocket, but I'm not reaching for it. I'm healing along. Now, my obedience dogs are looking at me. My field trial dogs are not, but we're walking along. He's doing a great job healing. And I say, yes, in response to what he's doing, then I reach for the reward.
Okay.
As long as I reach for the reward early, he's not in control. All he can do is hope that I choose to reach for the reward soon. But if I connect it with his behavior, another example is a front. You know, in obedience, dogs have to come in and sit in front of us and they have to sit straight and they're looking up at us. Okay, if I'm standing, I don't know if you can see my arms, but if I'm standing with my hands at my side and I'm looking down at the dog and I don't move, and I say yes, and then I reach for reward, he says, when I sit and I stare up at her, I make reward happen. If I say yes, he says, has nothing to do with what I do. I just hope she chooses to reach for the reward soon. And so that's the timing of a reward marker. It has to be connected to what the dog did, not because I reached for reward early.
So
Does that help you?
Yeah. So what about, so you described the first dog where you went through a session and then you rewarded at the end of the session.
Yeah.
Is it possible that the reward was marking the general overall compliant behavior that happened in the last 5 or 10 minutes? Is that possible? I mean, the dog had a pattern of good behavior. Not, so you're not buying it, are you?
No, I'm not buying it because I don't think he thinks back and goes, wow, for 5 minutes I was compliant and then it finally made her reach for reward. I don't think that's what happened. I think what a reward marker does, and this is why you brought up timing, not me now, remember that.
Oh, yeah.
I think what the timing does is we can teach dogs exactly what they did that made reward happen.
Yeah.
I mean, things like just things you would never think you could have taught a dog to do. Never mind just go over there or circle that cone. But how about when the turn your head to the right, and you mark that, and the dog says, okay, it was turning my head to the right that made reward happen. I mean, without a reward marker, how do you capture that moment?
No, you don't.
And I think that when we think in terms of capturing the moment, that timing is important.
We've got some good stuff to talk about here. It's still on this subject. I do have some questions here that I thought were really interesting that were brought. Do you have different commands for healing in the field versus in the ring, in the obedience ring?
I get asked this all the time. No, I do not. One of the things that I really believe is that dogs are situational or contextual. I think dogs pay much more attention to the situation they're in than they do the words we're saying. And so my dogs actually do 7 different things on the word heal. And that's because they read the context of the situation. When I'm in the obedience ring, my left hand is up, I'm moving at a different speed. It's a totally different look than when I come out of a holding blind and my hands are at my side. So no, I most of the time, things are different because of the context we're in, not because of the command I'm giving. And the more commands we use, and I think you'll agree with me, the harder it is to make them all important.
That's a good point. Well, I hear this all the time. When I get people that come from obedience that start doing some of the basics work, and there's a pile of bumpers. So the question is there a conflict in teaching dogs articles versus before you start actual force fetching? Tell me because you do both. Would you?
Yeah, it's the hardest thing to get a field trial dog to do. I'm going to just be really straight up honest with you. If you've done pile work and then you're going to try to teach a dog to do scent articles, it will be the hardest transition you can make. And so typically I do start to teach my dogs to do scent articles very early. I will say that those people that are watching that want to do both, if you go to my blog, obedienceroad.com/blog, there's an article on the blog called A New Look at Scent Articles, where I teach dogs to locate odor without retrieving it. And I can do that with my baby puppies. I can teach them to identify an odor before they even know how to pick things up. And once I started doing that with my field trial dogs early, it made scent articles much, much easier. And I tell other obedience people, if you have a dog who doesn't really love to retrieve, you won't have any trouble teaching them to do scent articles. A retriever loves the alert, which is what we do with scent articles. The alert is to pick it up. And a retriever says, if you don't like that one, I'll be right back. There's only 9 of them out there. I can just gather them all up. So we have to take the alert away, if that makes sense, Pat.
Okay.
We have to teach them to locate odor first, and then later teach them, oh, by the way, you're going to pick it up after you locate it.
Very good. So you said something, and before we go on to the aggression, how about the obedience dogs that come to the field and prey drive kicks in and the well-mannered obedience dog is no longer obedient?
Well, I've heard a lot of field folks kind of poke fun at the very accomplished obedience dogs who come out to the field and are completely disobedient. And what they don't understand is that it's not hard to keep an obedience dog under control because they're not in drive. What's hard is keeping them motivated to do all those unnatural things. So for a lot of obedience folks, they come out to the field and they've never seen their dog in drive like that. And they just don't have any experience and can't believe that, Simon, who's their obedience trial champion, would act this way because they've never seen him act that way in his life. And so they really don't have the skills to be obedient in that context. Again, it's contextual because they've never had to be. Obedience is just not that exciting.
Is it more difficult to go from field to obedience or obedience to field?
I don't know that I can answer that. I think it in large part depends on the dog.
Okay.
I like the fact that I have kind of figured out how to develop both those sets of skills right from the beginning, but I can imagine some of the dogs in my background that it would have been really hard to go from just a field background to obedience because we just don't require that same kind of eye contact and attention. And others that they were so willing to give me all that eye contact and attention that if I had taken them out in the field later, wouldn't have understood I wanted them to look out for the 400-yard long retired gun.
So I think of your dog Nate, who did he become an obedience trial champion?
Oh yeah.
So do you think his field skills or his advanced field training helped him at all in high level obedience?
They help him. It made it more interesting for both of us to have both things to do because he was a pretty powerful dog, and if all I had done was obedience with him, it would have been like trying to drive a Maserati in a Walmart parking lot. But I don't know that the field skills helped him other than to displace energy.
Well, possibly the control you achieved with all that drive in the field, did it not help you in the obedience ring? Because you said if he was the Maserati in the parking lot, then control would have been a problem.
I'm saying that's what doing obedience was like with him.
Oh, right.
Parking lot. I think that doing obedience helped me with him as a field dog more than the other way around.
I guess that's the question answer I was looking for. Oh, that's cool. Okay, great. So we go on to our third subject. This is going to be interesting. Dealing with aggression and other behaviors. Connie, you talked about providing practical approaches to navigating and resolving some of these tricky behavioral issues. I guess the first question I want to ask you, give me give me your definition of aggression.
In my world, aggression is any attempt to intimidate another dog or a person. And I say that because I've heard behaviorists say that it's an attempt to do harm. And I think from a practical standpoint of having a dog who might act aggressively, we need to respond way before he attempts to do harm, right? He gives us lots of clues that he is using his ability to intimidate to get him out of a situation he doesn't like.
So we just got done talking about marking or identifying behavior to give positive reinforcement. This would be how de-escalating bad behavior in the earliest form, I guess is what I hear you saying, before it escalates to the point, because there were multiple aggressive behaviors that happened before the dog actually, attempted to do harm, I guess is the politically correct word, or bite.
Right. Well, let's just, if you don't mind, back this up a little bit. When I owned the dog trainer's workshop and I was seeing, 3 and 4 aggressive dogs a week,
Wow.
I'm going to give you a very general view of why dogs act aggressively.
Okay, great.
Okay. Typically, it's fear aggression. And I call it the bully complex. It's a dog who says, I'm cornered, I'm trapped, I can't get away. If I act tough, that other dog won't know what a wimp I am. I mean, we saw a ton of fear aggression. We also see area aggression. That's a dog who acts aggressively in a car, a yard,
Okay.
a crate, a kennel run. We see possession aggression. It's my bone, it's my food bowl. And occasionally, really occasionally, we would see dogs that were what we call dominant aggressive. They were just saying, hey, there's a group here. I don't like where I am in the group. I'm going to change the group order. All right. We didn't use the verb to be to describe dogs. We didn't say that dog is aggressive. Okay. We said we only use the verb to act. He is acting aggressively. Because my experience over all those years and all those aggressive dogs was that most dogs are in a situation they're uncomfortable with, and quite by accident, they discover that if they act aggressively, the situation will change. Even if that's just going rah, 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 at another dog, and the other dog backs up, and the dog goes, "Ooh, that was effective." The story I used to tell a lot was the family would come to me and they'd have a dog that was intimidating the children. Well, I'd say, did he ever act aggressively? Well, when he was a puppy, we made the family rule, don't go near him when he's eating. Okay, well, that's a possession aggression. And then, oh yeah, he was on the couch and the kids ran in there to watch a movie and the dog kind of snapped at them. So they sat on the floor, right? So that's an area aggression. So by the time we got them, they weren't aggressive for one reason anymore. They were aggressive because it worked. And if you'd said to that dog, why are you acting that way? He would have said, well, because it changes my situation. And they really, so many dogs were not bad dogs. They weren't, genetically inferior. They had just made a discovery that this behavior would get them what they wanted. And so that's how we approach it. And you want me to go on or you want to ask?
No, I want you to go on.
Okay. So the first thing we do with dogs that are acting aggressively, so that could mean any of those situations, right, is that we have to make sure that the person who's handling the dog considers that person to be dominant to them. So I'm going to ask you to stop thinking about obedience and disobedience.
Okay.
I'm picturing me, I'm a cartoon character. I got 2 bubbles over my head. And this one says obedience and disobedience are opposites. This one says dominance and submission are opposites. So we don't want to get in the wrong bubble. If a dog is being disobedient, we want to make him be obedient. But when somebody would walk into my facility with a big Rottweiler, hackles, ears on top of his head, grumbling, and they start saying to the dog, sit, 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 I would say to them, wait a minute, we don't need him to be obedient. We need him to be submissive. And this is a case where most of the time, if I taught the person to act like another dog would,
okay,
they could get a lot more control over that dog who was acting aggressively. And so you think about how dogs interact with one another. And for example, if you've ever walked across the yard and your puppy comes racing across the yard and hits you from behind, Okay. You're out there trying to scoop and he just is going to take you out. That's a situation where I'd say, does he do that to the older dogs? And you'd say to me, well, only once. And I think that's an example of when you need to act like another dog would act. What did your older dog do to that dog to make him stop that? Right.
Mhm.
So when we're talking about dominance and aggression, what we would always do is have people, we do basically 3 games. We would say, if you put a piece of food in your hand and you hold it at your side and you ignore the dog, pretend you've forgotten he's there, and he comes over to take it from you, I want you to growl at him, just like another dog would. Because if you make a noise like a growl, and step toward the dog and move toward the dog, and he backs up and puts his ears back, he's saying to you, oh, okay, you are in charge. I'm not going to steal from you. I don't steal from that 6-year-old female Labrador over there. I'm not stealing from you either. Okay. And another place that's really easy to act like a dog is at openings or doorways. When you watch dogs maneuver in tight places, the more dominant dogs will go through first and the more submissive dogs will step back. You can do the same thing with a dog. So you're walking into a narrowing and you stop and the dog just kind of pushes you out of the way. If you growl at that dog and push him back, he'll treat you like he would a more dominant dog. So that was always our first the first thing we always did was say, hey, if you've got a dog who's acting aggressively, and usually for me it was, I can't walk him down the street, he's going to lunge and bark at every dog we go by. Then the first thing you have to do is make sure he considers you his pack leader. And then we can start to talk about how does he demonstrate submission to other dogs? Well, how can we get him to be submissive to you? And how can we teach him that if he acts aggressively, your response is going to be to make him be submissive, not obedient, but submissive. He's being dominant. You're going to make him be submissive.
So isn't some obedience behaviors require some degree of submission?
Well, I guess that if you're saying in general, every time my dog responds to an obedience command, he's being submissive to me. Yeah, maybe. But if that dog is fired up, growling at another dog,
Okay.
and I tell him to sit, he's going to sit and keep growling at that other dog.
Okay. No, all right.
Right?
Yeah. Makes perfect sense. So go back to the food thing. I mean, I'm sure it's. Is that the first thing you do, or do you do the doorway thing first?
Typically, we do the doorway first, and then we do the food game. And then I would send families home and I would say, do me a favor, let the dog drag a leash around the house for the next week. And every time he's in your way, make him move. So, you walk into the room and sometimes dogs lay in the doorway. They want to see what's going on all over the house. And if I ask enough questions, I find out the kids go around him, right? The kids never make him move. Well, no wonder the dog thinks he can boss the kids around. Dogs move out of the way for more dominant dogs. And I'm sure you've seen this in your house.
Mm-hmm.
I had an aged Shih Tzu for years and years, and she could walk across the room and everybody would get up and move out of her way. So you walk into the room and the dog's laying on the couch. You just pick up the leash and pull him off the couch and sit down where he was sitting. Or even if he's sitting in front of the couch and you want to sit in that spot, make him move. And I would just say to people, I want to know that he'll move out of your way, that he will say, hey, what space did you want to occupy? Because that's what he would do for a more dominant dog. That's what he should do for the people in his family too.
So the dog submits, lets
Mm-hmm.
you go through the doorway first, or backs off from the food. Is there a reward marker in the act of the submission, or is it just?
Well, typically I'm not rewarding that behavior. I'm saving that for my obedience and disobedience.
Oh.
However, let's say, okay, so ultimately what we would teach dogs, and I have a whole webinar that's available for people to watch about this and an article that I've written about this. So I hate to try to do it in a 5-minute conversation,
Okay.
but ultimately what I know is that when a more dominant dog disciplines a younger dog,
Okay.
what does that younger dog do? They look away and lie down, or they at least crouch down and look away, right?
Uh-huh.
Years ago, I was a chairman for a national obedience championship, and there was a group that came to watch from England. And one of the guys at the competition said to me, I don't understand you Americans. When you're really annoyed with a dog, you grab their face and you get in their face and you tell them, no, no, cut it out. That you don't do that. He said, that's so human and it's not dog. Dogs don't stare at one another when they're being disciplined. The dog who's being disciplined looks away. And that was in 1990, Pat, and I never forgot that. And I said, never again. If I want to be dominant to a dog, he has to look away. Think about how they interact with each other.
Okay.
And so we then teach dogs to go into what we call a submissive down for the person. Okay. And so we start the dog in a sitting position.
Okay.
That's an act of obedience. But if you stand over a dog, you are being dominant. And most men are much more natural at that than women are. Women like to kneel down and pet the dog and scratch him under his chin. Men typically, naturally lean over dogs, pet them on the top. It's just a more dominant position to be in. And if you do that and you've done the food game and you've done the door game and you start to put pressure on the dog right behind his the base of his skull, a lot of dogs, when you do that, they will just lie down. They will just become submissive for you because you've been playing all these games that say, hey, I'm in charge, I'm in charge. That becomes my correction for aggression.
Okay.
So if I'm walking down the street and the dog goes rah, 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 I pull him back on a leash and I push him into a submissive down. Not for the first time,
Right.
because I've already taught him how to do that, right? I've taught him around the house. I've been dominant with him. Now, interestingly, what's happening here, let me just back up and say, most people that would come to me, they'd say, I walk down the street and the dog starts to be aggressive. And I'd say, what do you do? And they'd say, I yell, no, no. And I jerk on his leash. And I'm thinking, from the dog's point of view, he's like, yeah, bark louder. Look, we're scaring him away together, right? So I say, pull him out of there and push him down. Get in a fight with him. You say to him, you thought that you were going to, go into battle. You're going to have to be submissive to me. But the end of the story, and I don't really want to try to describe all this in a webinar. I'd rather give people more information through other channels. However, what starts to happen, you asked about rewarding. When that happens to that dog a few times and he says, hey, I'm walking down the street, Pat, and I fired off at that dog and he pulled me out of there and made me be submissive. What they start doing is this, Pat, and it's so fun to see. And you talk about what do you praise? The dog will see another dog and look at you and step back and see another dog and look at you. Like, what are you going to do about that? And when we see that dog, remember his instinct is fight or flight. When we see that dog start to flee or start to back up, we absolutely move him away from the conflict and praise him like crazy because we're praising his decision to handle the situation differently.
Yeah, that's
it's really fascinating. But again, we approach it from a dominance and submission standpoint, not a obedient and disobedience. And when I talk about dogs that become submissive for us, they do it because of our body posture, not because we overpower them. And I think that's a typical misconception is I've heard people say, oh, it's going to be an alpha roll. I'm going to lay on him. And I think, oh yeah, look at me. Like how many 80-pound fired up Labradors am I going to get to the ground if I lay on them? I mean, it's not going to happen. So it's got to be their choice to be submissive, not that I was bigger and stronger than they were.
That's good stuff. Thank you. So we have the other difficult behaviors, which is at the back end of and we talked a lot about the aggression, but we lost a little time with our power outage. Well, I think one of the most difficult behaviors I can think of in the field game are dogs barking and the noise factors when they're competing.
Yeah.
Do you see that in the show in the obedience ring at all either? Does that?
Oh yeah, we do. Absolutely we do. Not as much in the sport of obedience because remember, they're not in that high drive state, but we certainly do see it in obedience. I think that most of the time, now I know that, we've seen and dealt with some very, very difficult noise problems with field trial dogs. So let's talk about, as an instructor, I tell my people all the time, I love my job. I want to get you out of trouble. but I also want to keep you out of trouble. If I can get to you soon enough and keep you out of trouble, that makes both of our lives easier, right?
Right, right,
So
right.
most of the time, I think we need to talk about keeping ourselves out of trouble. And, yeah, do we tackle those big, hard problems? Sure we do, but how do we stay out of trouble? And I would say that for most folks, and again, I'm not just talking to field trailers, I'm talking to obedience people, agility
Uh-huh.
people, people that have dogs that bark. The thing that I think is the most important is establishing a correction that we use when the dog doesn't stop barking on command that is unique to barking,
Okay.
so that there's no confusion on the dog's part. And actually, most of the time, we can do it with a squirt bottle of water. And then I say to people, take it out of all competitive venues. Where can you teach it? And somebody just said to me the other day, a loud, fired up German Shepherd, they said to me the other day, all he has to do is see one of us go outside with another dog, and he will stand at the window and start to just shriek. And I said, okay, perfect. We're not asking him to do anything except be quiet. And I said, let's put a leash on him, drop the leash on the ground, get a squirt bottle of water, set it somewhere between Gentle Mist and Jetstream. And when he runs to the door, you go right behind him or the window, put your foot on the leash, because you don't want him to be able to get further away from you than the squirt bottle reaches, right?
Okay.
Put your foot on the leash, say quiet, and squirt him. It's probably going to interrupt him. And when he goes, what happened? You say, very good. Because it's an act of obedience, right? I'm asking you to be quiet.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, and then walk away. If he fires it up again, let's do it in. And this was a dog I wasn't sure was going to actually work with, because this dog was older and had been doing this for a long time. And I got a text message from him today that said, you will be amazed at how well he understands quiet. But again, it was a specific correction. The dog had no question in his mind what he was being corrected for. He'd never been squirted before. It was associated with barking. The guy can hook a squirt bottle of water to his pocket and say, that's how I'm going to respond. And I think that makes it really clear to the dog exactly what he's doing wrong when you then take it into other situations.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. I could see, retrievers, there's so many things going on, but if they make noise in the truck, just barking out of similar motivation to what you described, that would be an easier way to identify the behavior that you want to change.
Right. And if you get somebody to ring the doorbell for you, and you
Ah.
you go to the door with them, and you go to the door with them, and I teach my dogs to bark on command. So I say to them, speak, speak, speak. Okay, I get to the door, I say quiet, poof, and they go, what? And then I say to my helper, wait 30 seconds and ring the doorbell again. And I walk back into the kitchen, right? And we do it again, and we do it a third time. By about the fourth time, they look at me and they go, that's Joe outside the front door. Are you going to let him in? This is stupid. And I go, well, good. I'm glad you figured that out today. We'll talk about it more tomorrow, right? And don't try to do it with a crowd of dogs at one time. I just one at a time. But they can learn, in that instance, I can bark on the way to the door, but when I get there, I got to stop. And then you take that skill into other situations, and you have more control of it.
So is the speak more of it's okay to do it, or you're actually asking them to bark?
Some of them I've actually gotten to bark on command. Later on, I can say speak and they'll bark. But yeah, I'm kind of encouraging the behavior to a certain point. There's that old behavior modification technique, which says if there's a behavior you don't like and you teach the dog to do it, and then you teach him when to stop, then you just stop telling him when to do it. I mean, that's been around forever, but I'm not sure that's always the answer. That's just how I approach it. You can bark now, but then you got to stop.
Very cool. Well, I know we could go on all night. Do you have anything else, Connie? I mean, I kind of went through my list here, and short of diving into another subject, is there any other thoughts you'd like to share?
We shared what we had planned. I mean, I'm happy to answer some questions if we have them, but if you'd rather just put them in touch with me, that's fine as well.
Well, let me see. We're really not in a position to. Do you have any questions, Robin? Okay, I didn't see one there. All right, let me grab a question here because I did have. Okay, I started my golden retriever in competition obedience, and when working in the field as we were hunt test training, the heads up conflicted with the field. How do you transition from heads up to focus on the field? Now that we did talk a little bit about that, but maybe not exactly how you change the heads up behavior. Do you think that can be contextual, like we talked?
Oh, absolutely. I think that if I could get that handler to say, okay, I've got to get the dog, if he's a competition obedience dog, knows how to look at a glove, which is no different than looking at a bumper on the ground. But if we just talk about, I need my dog to look out for a mark, restraint increases desire. So if she puts a buckle collar on the dog and holds and acts like she's holding him back and lets somebody yell and hoot and holler, she may have to go at shorter distances for a while, a longer while than the dog that doesn't know that. But she can get him excited about finding runners in the field, especially if they start hollering as soon as she comes out of the holding blind. So on the marks, I think that's just going to have to be very intentional and not let herself kind of get into situations that the other dogs can handle when her dog is saying, wait, I have no context to put this in. That's what I would tell her. And, walkout blinds with blind poles are a great way to get dogs to look out. And don't send them until they're looking out, because we want them to know that's what gets me to go. When I look out, I get to go. I get rewarded for looking out. So I wouldn't shortchange that problem. I would say I'm going to solve it now.
Very good, very good. Well, I think that's our hour-ish. Connie, thank you so much.
Hey, it's been my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, and we've got, I did promise you guys that I am going to share, let me do that here. And Connie, let me put this slide up. So I know, Connie, you can't see it, but this is, we've got obedienceroad.com, and this is your website. Would you describe that, what they're going to see when they go there?
Obedienceroad.com is kind of got two parts. You're going to decide when you get on the website whether you want information for a new dog or puppy owner. Maybe you've got family members that are trying to raise a dog, or whether you're interested in competitive obedience. And so you make the decision as soon as you get there, and you can kind of find out what information I have there. I have a pretty extensive blog with lots and lots of articles about it, about lots of different subjects. And the obedienceroad.com, that aggression webinar, is one of several webinars that's available if people want to see the whole thing.
So I've got two email addresses up here, and we've got support@obedienceroad.com and then Connie at onlineobediencetraining.com. Is there one that's a better way for somebody to get a hold of you or ask a question?
Whatever one they can remember, they can email me, and I will get back to them as quickly as I can.
Well, Connie, I want to thank you again for taking the time to talk to us. I know we had an audience. I know they appreciated it. I know I really enjoyed it. And so I guess with that being said, I'm going to thank you and your great husband, Pat, for sharing you with us.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a fun evening. I've really enjoyed it.
Well, thank you. And have a good night, everybody. And we'll see you next time.